something I say, it's alright.
Good evening, my fellow Americans. Tonight I want to talk to you on a subject of deep concern to all Americans and to many people in all parts of the world, the war in Vietnam. I believe that one of the reasons for the deep division about Vietnam is that many Americans have lost confidence in what their government has told them about our policy. The American people cannot and should not be asked to support a policy which involves the overriding issues of war and peace unless they know the truth about that policy.
Daniel Ellsberg, a graduate of Harvard, began his career at the Pentagon working under the Secretary of State as a defense analyst. This led to his 2-year stay in the south of Vietnam, working for the State Department assessing the war. When Ellsberg came back from the war, however, he developed a serious disaffection for the whole operation, often attending anti-war rallies, all while maintaining his position as a defense analyst under the Secretary of Defense. With this position in the Pentagon, Ellsberg had access to top-secret documents regarding the Vietnam War that he helped contribute to. These papers came to be known as the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers were classified documents that revealed truths behind the Vietnam War that were never shown to the American public, such as the fact that the U.S. was mainly there not to protect the democracy of Vietnam, but to keep Communist China from taking over influence of more land. As well, U.S. involvement in Vietnamese elections and bombings in surrounding countries that were never reported. As anti-war activists, Daniel Ellsberg thought the American people deserved to know the truth behind this controversial war. His plan to do something about it, steal the documents and release them to the press so that everyone would know the truth behind the war. Ellsberg faced a serious dilemma in this decision, however, as he fully knew that an action like this could land him in jail for a very long time, as he was in violation of the well-known espionage acts that often put whistleblowers behind bars. But he also knew that the American people had the right to know what was going on in their government and the real reason as to why their sons were dying in a country on the other side of the world.
As a result of his actions, the government attempted to prosecute Ellsberg in retaliation on the charges of espionage, theft, and conspiracy. However, the charges were dismissed after it was exposed that the government committed a third-rate burglary to discredit and blackmail Ellsberg. Burglars, hired by the government, also known as Nixon's plumbers, were hired to break into Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office and find information that the government could use against Ellsberg. Throughout the attempted prosecution, Ellsberg stood his ground, knowing that he had made the right decision. He could only let the newspapers publish their articles and let the people of the United States decide what to do with this information, and to determine whether he endangered national security or revealed the government isn't as forthcoming with the truth as the public believed. Prior to Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, the culture surrounding America and the role of the American government in the world and its wars allowed government secrecy and deception to remain unchecked. The Cold War era was upon the world, and the American government felt it was their duty to stop communism from spreading at whatever the cost, and to promote democracy wherever it was needed. That role gave them the overarching justification they needed to take any action. The remnants of McCarthyism, the practice of accusing someone who is probably innocent of treason without any evidence from the 1950s, left an impression on the American people, so some Americans wouldn't blame the government for taking action to rid the world of communism by using any means necessary.
Ellsberg challenged government secrecy, changing the way the public views the government. Ellsberg opened our eyes to how secretive and deceptive the government can be, sometimes willing to do anything to advance their agenda. The Pentagon Papers unearthed the true reason that the U.S. was fighting in Vietnam. The Nixon administration was valuing their reputation over the safety of the U.S. troops. After the Pentagon Papers were leaked to the New York Times, the Nixon administration took out a restraining order on the Times, claiming that the Pentagon Papers put the nation's safety at risk. Ellsberg later leaked information to the Washington Post and later the Boston Globe. By deliberately disobeying the administration, both Ellsberg and the newspapers proved that the little guy can go against the government. The government tried to keep the classified documents secret, but this action was thwarted by the courts. The ruling was in favor of the press, who could still publish articles about the classified Pentagon Papers. This landmark decision cemented the power of journalists. The media will continue to be a safe haven for whistleblowers in the future. Already established journalistic organizations, like the Washington Post and New York Times, will continue to play a huge role in aiding whistleblowers worldwide. Modern platforms, like WikiLeaks, will similarly support whistleblowers. However, distrust of the government became more commonplace after the Nixon administration. We are still suffering from some of the same paranoia today. Whenever a tragedy happens, conspiracy theorists jump to conclusions of an inside job. A particularly volatile example is that of the Sandy Hook truther movement. Popularized by the InfoWars radio host Alex Jones, the theory states that the massacre at Sandy Hook Elementary was created by the government to further an agenda of gun control. According to the theory, the families of the murdered children were actually actors mourning kids who had never existed. Sandy Hook truthers have threatened parents of the killed children and similarly harassed anyone connected to the tragedy. Similar conspiracy theories exist for nearly every American tragedy. We have created a culture where distrust in the government is so great that when bad things happen, at least some of the public thinks the government was involved.
When comparing to Spotlight, both show newspapers fighting to publish documents in order to expose injustices on the part of large and respected organizations, the examples being the Catholic Church and the United States government. And in the end, both cases ruled in favor of the newspapers. When comparing to the case of Joe Wilson, both show a person standing against the U.S. government to expose information they believed the American people deserved to know. In today's world, it is harder for a government to block these publications because there are such outlets that are not under the jurisdiction of the government, such as WikiLeaks. Another similarity is to the Iraq War. Both with Vietnam and Iraq, there was faulty information that escalated both wars.